of flesh and blood.
Welcome to Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World. I'm Richard Dugan, your host, and I thank you so much for joining us here on the program. We come your way on Sundays at 7 a.m. and 7 p.m., Monday mornings at 1 a.m., and Wednesdays at 9 a.m. That's our special edition of Tell Me Your Story. Again, New Paradigms for a New World. We're looking for those new ways of living because the old ways, just look around us, they don't work anymore. I don't think you can really argue the point. They don't work. I mean, how many people do we have in poverty in the lower class? And how many people do we have in the upper class and no middle class? And the classes to begin with, why do we have those in the first place? I maybe that's just the way it washed out. And that's kind of the subject of today's program is this aspect of not necessarily economic equanimity. All right. That's not exactly where we're going, but we're going to talk about it from the standpoint of not only the material world, but also more of the metaphysical aspects of what we have experienced in the last few months. So with the whole issue of the banking crisis, as they call it, a few closures of banks, and so forth. And we're going to talk about this with a gentleman who has some expertise in this area, especially from an intuitive perspective. His name is Elliott Robertson. And I want to thank you so much for joining us here on the program and your willingness to certainly share with our listeners your perspective. And if I'm reading this correctly, Elliott, if I'm reading it correctly, in a manner of speaking, in the material world, the die has already been cast. And as much as those of us, myself included, the metaphysician that I am, want to be optimistic and positive, a glass half full kind of thing, there are some things that they're just going to be because the decisions have already been sort of made. And I don't mean that in the terms of predestination. In other words, it's all laid out. I mean, in terms of decisions that have been made that have set this locomotive in motion. Is that a fair assessment? And thanks for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me on this show. And yes, I do focus on intuitive awareness of what's going on rather than any expertise in finances. Yeah, what you're saying about the die being cast is quite accurate from where I sit. But by that, I mean the ball is already rolling and nothing can stop the ball from getting to some of the destinations that it's going towards. For example, the thing that I've been having my intuition come up for is the closing of banks everywhere you go, not just the handful that we have already seen. I think those are just sort of the canary in the cave, you might say, of what is going to happen in a much bigger way as we proceed over the next few weeks and months.
Well, it is something that obviously is a major focal point for a majority of people, whether they be in the government, other financial institutions, certainly, the media. It's and of course they say that the economy is the most important thing in our lives, in our civilization. Without an economy, and I'm just sitting here going, I think having clean drinking water and being able to breathe the air and unpoisoned food actually, I think, ranks a little higher than the economy, because if we don't survive, there is no economy. And I find that interesting with corporations today who balk at regulations that try to keep the public safe, the consumer safe, and yet they still try to skirt it. They still try to skirt these regulations to try to maximize profits and so on and so forth. And this is just one element of this whole thing. Again, not being an economist yourself, and I'm not either. I'm just a guy who's observing and sharing my observations as you are sharing your intuitional insights. this whole scenario, I mean, we saw this we kind of saw this happen in 2008, 2009, didn't we? And is that another one of those signposts along the way that we should have heeded, but obviously we didn't because, well, guess what? It seems like we're right back there again.
Yeah, I really haven't given much thought to 2008, 2009. So that's an interesting thing to look at and make comparisons about. I'd like to backpedal just for a little bit
Sure.
to provide more clarity about what I mean when I say I'm intuitional and I'm an intuitive. What I really mean to say, if I were to be more specific and accurate about it, is I'm a world stage intuitive. And if you were to come to me and say, what's my living situation going to be in a week, I can't answer personal questions. I don't have that gift. So for a long time, I was sort of discounting the world stage intuitions I was getting. They were just popping up all over the time, all over the place. But I didn't label them, identify myself as an intuitive based on that, because I thought that the definition of intuitive was being able to answer those personal questions that sometimes people like to ask intuitives. But just to clarify with respect to this particular bank closure theme, there are two different kinds of intuition that I experience. And if I can just lay those out very briefly, then I can tell you which bucket the bank closures are attached to, where they sit in me, where my intuition is coming from. The first kind of intuition is the direct intuition. For example, I might look at a picture of somebody. I did look at a picture quite a few years ago of a lady, a politician, world stage, standing far apart, looking very rejected or forlorn, far apart from her husband. And I'm not going to name any names. And it was just so apparent to me from the first moment of looking at that picture that it was all about, not about her true feelings, because I just knew it was not a surprise to her what was going on in their relationship. That she had already known about it, and it wasn't like she was feeling jilted. It was just that I knew that the entire photo was an opportunity to garner sympathy, to garner votes, and so on and so forth. So that's direct, and they just show up all the time. More recently, with that same lady, I saw a picture of her. She's become a senator. I saw a picture of her at a Senate event, and I immediately knew it wasn't her. It was a direct knowing that I thought it was a lookalike, and later on I learned something more about technology. So I think it may have been a technological event that I was looking at in the photo. In any event, I don't want to get sidetracked about technology. That's one kind, and that's not the kind of intuition that has been taking place for me around financial stuff and bank closures. The other kind is I can hear the bell of truth ringing within me if I'm engaged in listening to somebody say something that is absolutely true. That's a bullseye. And in this particular case, I was watching somebody speaking on YouTube. It was all about how bank closures are right around the corner. And I have a very good sense of discernment for what's true and what goes clunk. And in this case, I just absolutely knew that exactly what this guy was predicting to happen was indeed on its way. I don't deal with timelines, though. I don't really, that's just not my forte to say exactly how much longer we're going to have to wait.
Well, and what we're going to do with this particular program, some people are going, well, that's awfully pessimistic and on and on and on. No, 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 no. Hang on. Because we are going to deal with the more optimistic aspects. Again, the opportunities in 2008, 2009, despite or because of what happened, a lot of people, I don't know if it was hundreds of thousands of people, lost their jobs. But guess what came along after that? The entrepreneurial boom. it exploded. People figured out, I didn't want to work for that company anyway. I want to do my own thing, and they found things to do. Even during the pandemic that was brought about in March of 2020, people initially a little shock, I'm sure, being sequestered in their homes and so forth, and then they began to realize, you know what, I'm home and I got all this time on my hands. I could do this and I could do that and I could help people and I could, et cetera, et cetera. And again, another entrepreneurial boom. So that's really what we want to talk about here today with Elliott Robertson. That's kind of, I mean, yes, you have this information, this insight from your intuition, but you also are aware of opportunities that are available to folks through these kinds of challenges that we as human beings face, correct?
Yeah, it doesn't have to be financial. All sorts of life challenges can come up. And I'm really grateful for the challenge of the bank closures that are coming up because I think that's going to act as a catalyst for spiritual growth for so many people.
We're going to continue talking with Elliott Robertson. And again, we're talking about the bank closures and opportunities during this challenging time that there are those who say, even who are economists, who are saying the same thing. We'll see. We'll see what happens as the days and the weeks and the months roll on. But at the same time, we'll also take a look at some of those opportunities as we continue here on Tell Me Your Story. I'm Richard Dugan, your host. Elliott Robertson's my guest here on the program. Give us a little bit of the background on you and also on this intuitive aspect of you. I mean, we promote on this program all the time, Elliott, that we want people to spend time going within. We call it the decade of perfect vision, where we encourage people to go within and to listen to that still small voice. Now, most of the time, most of us are listening for ourselves. Okay. I'm not listening for Elliott, and Elliott's not listening for me. Elliott is listening for Elliott and Richard's listening for Richard. But you are also connected in some other way to a worldly, if you will, or global insight. Am I categorizing that correctly?
That's the place where my intuition is strongest, is when it comes to events happening on the world stage.
Okay. How long have you had this uh, uh, um, global stage insight, we'll call it?
It's been at least 20 or 30 years.
And when it first started, what was your initial reaction?
Well, what I ended up experiencing for the most part is just not really giving much credit to it because, like I was saying earlier, I didn't really connect the dots between that being intuition or making me an intuitive. I just compared myself to some of the people out there who I think of as intuitives and how they're able to, at the drop of a hat, know what's going to happen or what potentials are available. I don't mean to make it sound predictive, but just know what the probabilities are for somebody in their personal life. So I wasn't matching up with my understanding of what intuition was. And so it was not like it was a big deal. It was not like something I was focusing on. It was just something that I was experiencing in my life again and again.
Mm.
At the same time, looking back, I just noticed how spot on a lot of things were. I'm not going to, just one more example that I'll throw out there that I'm not going to name was a moment when I said to my secretary, we were both aware of something that was going on right after we had arrived at the office, it started. And based on, what was going on around me, I was like, oh my goodness, the United States is the only country that could have pulled this off. Nobody else on the world could have done that. The New York Times did not and still hasn't collaborated my intuition. But when my intuition shows up, it's very often just a knowing and it has a certainty to it. And so there has never been a moment of doubt since that moment, since while the event was happening. I said to my secretary, this is what's happening. It's not something that a lot of people are going to think it is.
Mm. I find this all very interesting. As I said at the front end of the program, we don't usually talk about current events. At the same time, we can't escape the world in which we live, and we do have to find those ways of maneuvering through these challenges. And as you have stated, this decade has been one of the great I should say, this decade has been one of great optimism for you. And whenever you think of the future, it is with certainty that all is working together for the good of humanity. A quantum leap catalyzed by the unprecedented challenges that could be on the way. And because everything is fluid, everything is in motion, I do like the fact that you say here that it is the likelihood of bank closures. You're not saying that the banks are all going to close, but the likelihood. We've already had, I think, two. As far as I'm aware, there have been at least two that have closed. I know they're working on trying to keep one. I heard that, for example, the Silicon Valley, SVB, I believe it was, they were trying to split it up into two parts to see if they couldn't find people who were willing to, I suppose, take it on and so forth. And yet they are reassuring depositors, I guess, that their funds are secure because they're covered by this FDIC insurance and so forth and so on. But when we talk about being optimistic, and keeping our chins up with positivity, if you will, using your words, what is it that we want to be looking toward or looking at to do just that, to, regardless of what's happening on the outside of us, what should we be doing on the inside?
Yeah, I just recently wrote a PDF, an ebook, very short ebook that is called Preparing for the Bank Closures. And it's not about advice in terms of, oh, you should buy silver, or you should buy gold, or whatever. I don't know what all the different options are. I'm not a financial expert. It's not that kind. Preparing often means that to people. So that's why I say, no, it's not what preparing sounds like. It's all about preparing yourself for being sovereign and unshakable when it happens. And I think that it's never too early to know that there's the possibility of something that is going to be earth-shaking right around the corner. And it's never too early to prepare for that inwardly, to have some spiritual growth going on, to, especially in this particular case, to start thinking more expansively. So often we fall into the trap of just getting into the quicksand, you might say, of being a victim. The banks close, for example, if that's what ends up happening, and the tendency might be to fall into the trap of, oh, I'm a victim, and there's nothing I can do about it, and the world is more powerful than me. The banks are, I have no recourse. Incidentally, the FDIC, according to my source of information for the bank closures, has a very limited amount of capital and has already spent 20% of it with just the few that have closed. So they're down to 80% already.
Yeah.
Of their total amount. So there may be a lot of rough sledding going on and unrecoverable funds. And we can prepare for that by standing in our invincibility. And there are a number of ways to do that. One of them is to just ask what if questions, because if we're asking what if questions, we are inviting our span or lens or aperture to become broader and to not get stuck in that little quicksand spot of, this is how the world looks, that narrow mentality of, there's nothing I can do about it, it's hopeless, I'm a victim, End of story. If we're asking what if questions, such as, what if this is a chance for me to discover the power within me? What if this is a chance for me to be more fully involved in my community, supporting people with their needs and receiving support from them for my needs? I don't want to give you suggestions. I'd love to invite all of you to just write your own list
Hmm.
and just allow your imagination, tap into your own imagination and come up with whatever's right for you in your situation. But whatever what if questions are the ones that are most real for you and practical for you and more alive in you than the ones that I'm just putting out there as examples.
What is it that you do, say 9 to 5? If there is, nowadays it's hard to say. I mean, I don't even work 9 to 5. I mean, some days are longer, some days are shorter, and it just kind of, it's a wonderful thing to have that level of flexibility. But what about you?
I've been a spiritual growth coach for a number of years now, and it's only recently that I've started to call myself a world sage intuitive. And this has really helped me to start to look at my role as a spiritual growth coach with a broader perspective, with a deeper perspective, just knowing that there's more I can do than simply go down the path of helping people with their spiritual growth. I can also tap into my intuitions and help sort of merge the two and intertwine the two and allow exercises that will help with spiritual growth, that will help with expanding one's vision of what's possible, and so on and so forth, to address not only what's going on inside and my own ability to step into my sovereignty and my invincibility, or my clients, uh, to help my clients step into themselves and to get in touch with their invincibility. But also, it can be helpful uh, in preparing for the disasters that are happening on the world stage, especially if I have a specific thing that I can bring to a client's attention, such as the banks closing most likely very, very soon.
Mm.
It's just sort of like a marriage between these two hats that I wear, spiritual growth coach and world stage intuitive. I'm so glad I can bring them to the service of the same person in the same moment in the same session.
Mm. And you said it was Rogue Sage Intuitive?
World stage
Oh, World.
intuitive.
I beg your
Yeah.
pardon. World Stage. World Stage Intuitive. Elliott Robertson is my guest, and this is Tell Me Your Story. It is really a pleasure to have you, Elliott Robertson, here on the program. World Sage Intuitive. World Stage Intuitive. One of the things that I'd like to talk a little bit about is, if through your experience as a spiritual coach as well, what does the the outer world economy or economic system, what does that represent for us internally as individuals? Do you have an insight into that as to what that represents within us? Because there always seems to be some, I mean, when there are weather disturbances, hurricanes, tsunamis, volcanic eruptions, earthquakes, tornadoes. We had, a series of, what was it, 17 atmospheric rivers flow over California. People think that it's over. It's not over because we have so much snow up on the mountains. When the weather heats up and that snow starts to melt, that water's got to go somewhere and everything's full. So there's a representation there as well. Can you give us any insight into this aspect of what we're talking about in terms of these economic challenges? What do they mean for us as individuals spiritually?
Yeah, that's something that I have not been delving into, giving much thought to over the years, and perhaps I will expand in that direction. I love that question. What I have been noticing is just whatever comes our way as we travel down our path. Even in my case, one of the things that came my way was the need to adjust the routine I had every morning. This was just 2 or 3 years ago. All of a sudden, the cafes in the spring of 2020 the ones in my city all closed down. And my routine had been to go first thing in the morning to a cafe to either write a to-do list or a poem or whatever. I would always go just with pen and paper and spend an hour or whatever with a cup of coffee. So that was something that I did have a little grief about. It was a loss. And I did have a little cursing going along with it. That's a human response. And hopefully I was able to dwell on the positive and glance at the negative instead of just getting totally 100% into the cursing and the griping. So in any event, what I noticed when I look at the world, both in general terms, the large ongoings, and in personal life stories, whatever your wife leaves you or whatever, um, something's more small and personal than what's on in the headlines.
Mm-hmm.
All of these things that we encounter, whatever cards were dealt, are always possibly have the possibility of being used as fertilizer for the garden within us. There's always the chance that we will end out sort of like they're always sort of like going to the gym. They always invite us to go to the spiritual gym and have a spiritual workout and become more spiritually enriched and less spiritually impoverished, more spiritually mature. So that's more my perspective in general.
Hmm. Well, like I said, I love what some of our guests have shared in that regard, that stuff that happens on the outside is a reflection of what's going on the inside of each one of us at some level. Not necessarily to the level of the kind of turmoil that we might experience with, let's say, any of those other natural disasters or even man-made disasters, for that matter. But I've always found that interesting, and I do try to keep an open mind in that regard to seeing what's going on, and it's just really, really interesting. And there's also the desire to want to separate oneself from all of these external events. I don't know about you, but I try not to listen to the news and try not to listen to I'll call it the rhetoric from the individuals who are being covered, regardless of what their position is in government or in education or the economy or religion or sports or what have you, because that's their stuff. That's not mine. And I don't need that energetic influx. I really don't. I'd rather be out there with my battery-powered weed whacker cutting down the grasses that have grown crazy with all of the rain and the snow that we had up where we live. We're talking with Elliott Robertson. He is a spiritual coach. I want to talk a little bit more about that aspect of your life and the work that you do as we continue here on Tell Me Your Story. I'm Richard Dugan, your host, and Elliott Robertson's my guest. He is a world stage intuitive. I want to thank you, of course, again for sharing your insights, because a lot of folks get very scared when people start talking about, and bear in mind, I worked for 15 years for a Christian radio station, and they were always talking about the end of the world and the Antichrist and Armageddon and all of this stuff. And granted, I'd only been around it for 15 years, but it was only after about 4 or 5 years I was getting bored with the story. It was like, is there anything I can do to help bring about all of this stuff that you're talking about? You say it's going to happen. So how can I help to facilitate its happening so we can move on to a new story? Because this is getting old. You guys have been talking about this for 2,000 years. We need to come up with a new story. And I'm wondering about that in terms of the work that you do with people who they get sort of trapped in their fear, Elliott. And it's almost as if they need to write a new story. Is that a technique that you've ever incorporated in terms of helping them to shift? Because I know you would agree, we have to go through these emotions. Can't go around them. We can't sidestep them. How do you help people to go through these emotions so they can get unstuck?
one of the first steps, the most foundational thing, is just to become aware of the choices you're making. And the choice to uh, sabotage yourself, for example, to let fear lead the way, those are all choices. And there are other choices available. So often people don't think of the negative, limiting, constricting things that they do, such as sabotaging themselves, such as letting fear get in the way, such as diving into despair and doubt at the drop of a hat. Um, but some people, I think it's very easy to just think, oh, that's just the way I am, or I've always been a doubtful person. All sorts of stories like that can keep us from having awareness and seeing that there's a choice before us. So, starting with just the whole powerful notion of choice and asking clients to get in touch with what choices they've been making over the last week. I do things week by week.
Mm-hmm.
To have a moment with pen and paper and to jot them down. Writing can really help with awareness. And then to just take a look at what's on the other side of the fence, what's on the other side of the possibility, how it could have, how maybe next time if you catch yourself, what might end up happening is a different choice.
Hmm. You ever run into people who that's almost their mantra? I don't have a choice. I have to do this. I've said this. I don't care where you are. If someone were listening to this in a prison, or in some institution where they were sequestered, so to speak, you still have choices. You always have choices. It just depends upon what it is that you want. And is that sort of the core of making choices? Is you kind of need to know what it is that you want.
Definitely, that's one of the pieces that can really be helpful for sure. And also just having some awareness around the choices you are making can also be helpful, uh, as opposed to, like you were giving an example of people saying, "Oh, I don't have a choice. I have to do this." Just having some awareness of the entire landscape.
Hmm.
Uh,
When now you said you have been aware primarily of the world stage and your intuition for, you said, what, 20, 30 years?
mhm.
Okay. But what about your personal intuition? That must have come along even earlier. Can you share a little bit about your own personal experiences with hearing that voice and also reaching a point of trust?
Well, I'm glad you're bringing up the word trust. As far as my own intuition goes, my best examples, I don't mean my most glitzy or showy examples, I mean my truest moments of intuition have been world stage. So what I'm beginning to notice is that there are all ways in which intuition can show up. We're all very intuitive. I really think that we're all mystics and we're all intuitive. We all have an inner knower. But in some cases, the natural default realm in which your intuition might show up most, or at least in my case, it's the world stage. And in other cases, I have a friend who finds that scary and would never want to get any intuition from the world stage, or maybe she's just saying that jokingly. But for her, it's always just one-on-one settings when she's sitting down with somebody and just gets a question, even without having ever met her client or whoever it is that has just introduced themselves, without having necessarily any of the background story. So that's what in other words, basically, fruit juice is the juice of intuition shows up whether or not it looks like an apple or like a pear or like a mango. The intuition, the juice is still there. It's just intuition is intuition, no matter where it shows up. And for me, it has been the world stage primarily. And I'm glad you brought up the word trust, because that is really, if I want to lead clients to just one thing, it is trust. If I just want to limit it to one thing, that is just the key to, you were asking about, well, how do you remain optimistic when the banks are closing or whatever is going on around you? And when all is said and done, it is a journey towards deepening and deepening and deepening one's trust in the cosmos, in God, however you want to think of trust. And in fact, I'm reminded of Albert Einstein's quote: "The most important question is the question: is the universe friendly?" How you answer that question makes all the difference in the world.
Yeah. Interesting. And I got to thinking about this as you were sharing what you were sharing about this issue of trust. There are a lot of people who don't trust other people, let alone their still small voice, that intuition, the messages that they're getting from inside. And I always hearken back to an episode of Star Trek Next Generation where the episode, I don't know that it was called Trust, but it dealt with that issue. And we're talking about now, of course, the android Data, and he's having this interaction with First Officer Riker. And at the end of the episode, he and Riker are having a conversation, and Data says, "Well, when you trust, you end up getting hurt. So wouldn't it be better to avoid the hurt and not trust?" To which Riker responds, "No, absolutely not." And I'm kind of that way in that, I hear from people on occasion when they find out about a certain situation that happened in business with a particular client or what have you, that, well, it didn't quite go the way I had thought it would go, but it went the way it went, period. And they said, "Well, yeah, but you should never have anything to do with that person again." I said, "Well, okay, we had one situation." And it almost harkens back to the story I heard. You referred to Einstein before. Another story I heard about Einstein in school. And he was asked to come up and write on the board his timetable of nine times one. And he wrote it out as 9. And 9 times 2 is 18, and so forth, all the way up to 9 times 9 is 81, and then 9 times 10, and he put 92. And everybody started laughing and criticizing and so forth. And he turned around and basically said, "Isn't it interesting how I was able to get 9 answers correct, and nobody said anything. Nobody said oh, that's wonderful. That's correct. Very good. You're very smart. All you could do was criticize the 10th time where I made what you perceive of as a mistake." Of course, he knew what 9 times 10 was. And that seems to be the way that a lot of people are when they're around people that maybe they've known. I mean, I have a best friend, and I love saying that I've known him for over 50 years. We met in 6th grade, and we've been through a lot. We went on a trip together. Money almost drove us apart, and I said, "I'm not willing to sacrifice this relationship over this issue of money. So I'm basically going to say, you don't owe me anything." Because we argued over, well, you owe me this and you owe me that, and no, let's just call it even and preserve the friendship. And I just see so many people, and now in our day here we are today, Elliott. We've got people that are splitting up in families over, you'd think, religion, right? You'd think, politics, which is, I love what one of, it's been framed this way: politics, it's nothing more than theater. So get some popcorn. If you're going to watch, get some popcorn and have a little laugh track going and watch it as though it were theater. It's not serious. Because these connections, how do you help people in that regard through the spiritual counseling to foster these, would you say, necessary connections? Because Isn't that how we're designed to be connected? I mean, you and I would agree we're already connected. Okay, we're all connected. Okay, that we'll set that aside metaphysically for the moment. When I'm talking about these relationships on the material level, isn't that how we're designed to be?
Absolutely. I so appreciate your question. And we are all connected, and we all have more of an awareness. It becomes more palpable, it becomes more the guide of our relationships, that knowing of our connection, that sensing of our connection, that living from the the compassion and the love shows up, and our relationships get better as we grow mature
Mm-hmm.
spiritually, as we start with our relationship with ourselves and notice how we've been judging ourselves and come to a place of really, I would say, totally, ultimately, totally letting go of self-judgment.
Yeah.
Uh, so from there, it just really does flower and spring out in all directions. So yeah, it does begin with having a certain level of maturity spiritually from the practice of uh, from the spiritual practices, from dealing with the fertilizer, doing the work, having awareness, and so on and so forth.
Hmm. I remember when my best friend and we were probably in our late teens or early 20s, and he came out to me. He told me that he was gay, and I'm going, what do you want me to do with that? I doesn't change anything for me. It doesn't change a darn thing about our relationship. Well, you're still my best friend. You just happen to be gay, so what? And I find that a lot of people in families, that's one of the big things that, especially with parents who are locked in a particular belief system that says that's not okay. And it's like, well, who are you to say? It's not your life. And my parents, for example, uh, um, they basically let us become the people that we are. They would not interfere. Now, obviously, as kids growing up, they were there to guide us, and they gave us everything that they could as we were growing. But once we reached that age, I guess you might say, of accountability, they pretty much let us do what we were going to do. I mean, I've been divorced once, my brother twice, but my sisters all have been with the same man for the duration thus far. Okay. And they're all very happy, and they are genuinely happy with the partnership that they have. And that's great. Um, I've gone to my parents asking advice, and that was the only reason why my parents would ever get involved, is if we came to them. Um, do you find that, do you have challenges with some folks who come to you? That some of the stuff that they might share with you, even on a spiritual level, is really personal. My father, I don't know. I mean, I know a little about his spiritual life, but it's his, not mine. Okay. And so that's okay that I don't know. But there are those who are very shy, shall we say. They're introverted when it comes to their spirituality. And it is a personal thing, and I get that. But when you're trying to coach them and guide them and so forth, do you run into some little blocks here and there that you're able to help them to work through, to, I don't want to say open up necessarily, but at least consider those possibilities we were talking about?
Yeah, I think that you're imagining a spiritual growth coach to be different from what I feel like I am, and
Okay.
that's fine. Maybe there are some spiritual growth coaches out there, I don't know, who delve into the happenings in that people are encountering, the things that are going on in their personal lives. And that can come up when people are working with me. However, it's all in the context of homework assignments. Basically, when I'm working with clients, I have designed programs, and the programs are just a lot of rich exercises that you can do to support yourself in having more awareness about how you're sabotaging yourself or whatever. And then the time that we spend together a week later is first and foremost about reviewing the exercises, reviewing the insights that may have come up, the awarenesses, the questions and answers, how did the visualization go, or whatever the exercise homework assignment may have been. And then from there, we may end out just going straight to, okay, the next 7 days, this is going to be the fertilizer you use for your spiritual growth. So it's not really like a counseling session necessarily, or I imagine there are a lot of spiritual directors who would probably be more like a counseling session. It really is just my own understanding of what I want the spiritual growth coach to be able to do. And, I like having it in that way because then those who graduate or whatever and finish that program have a reference point for, oh my goodness, I can go back to this exercise, or I can design my own exercise if they want to be that bold, or, oh, I already have gone through that process with him, and now I can sort of be my own spiritual coach and have that dialogue with me about, oh my goodness, this is what I'm just now catching myself doing, or whatever. If the homework was about catching yourself with a pattern of bitterness, or whatever your pattern might be. Uh, and I just also want to applaud your parents, because it sounds to me like they have been not really having much in the way of expectations or demands, at least compared to a lot of other parents out there. And I really feel like it can be a trap to have expectations about yourself, about the world, about other people. Expectations have to be, all of them, thrown out the window. And you can replace them with a sense of expectancy and a sense of anticipation, with a looking forward to, a wondering about what might show up today as you walk out the door. I feel like even though the word expectation and expectancy sound the same, they really are vastly different, and maybe even opposites. If we have a wonderful sense of expectancy about good things coming our way, and if we allow expectancy to be more defining our relationship with other people as opposed to demands and expectations, those energies would block the communication, the intimacy, getting to know them better, and expectancy, although coupled maybe with curiosity and other wonderful things, invites people to reveal themselves, invites getting to know people better and establishing some intimacy.
I love it. I like that definition, and certainly my parents certainly did do that very thing, and they have been and verbally have stated that they have been proud of each one of us, all six of us kids. They raised six. They wanted a big family, so they got one, and but they've told each one of us how proud of them, how proud of us they are in terms of what we have made of our lives. And each one of us has made of our lives something different from the other five. And it's really kind of cool. And my father, who just recently passed away, I think about him an awful lot. As a matter of fact, this vest that you see me wearing is actually my father's vest. It's one of those things that my mother asked me to go through some of his things while I was there for the memorial, and so this was one of them. And I wear it almost every day when I come into work, and it just reminds me of him and reminds me of the lessons that he taught me. And so forth. So I think that each one of us is going to find those. I like to call them anchors that help us to move forward. We're talking with Elliott Robertson here on Tell Me Your Story. I'm Richard Dugan, your host, along with Elliott Robertson. He is a spiritual counselor. He is a world stage intuitive, and I have to say that this it's interesting to get this different perspective. Nothing is set in concrete. And, even though, we would both be in agreement that it does seem that the die has been cast, and that it's, maybe it's the die's been cast in lead, because if you melt lead, it goes liquid and then goes anywhere it wants to go. It's supposed to be in concrete, and you have to use a sledgehammer to break it up. One of the things that I'd heard too, Elliott, is about institutions. And you know how we talk about, we're looking for those new ways of living because the old ways, they just aren't working, right? And I said to one of my guests, I said, I guess what we need to do is tear down the old institutions and build new ones. He said, oh, no, 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 no. Do not tear down the old institutions. What you want to do is you want to build new institutions that make the old ones obsolete. And then they'll crumble. They will just crumble under their own weight. It seems as though that's kind of what's happening in the world today. And with this conversation we're having about your insights regarding your world stage intuition about the banks and the financial institutions in our country in particular, it's likely that they may start, going down like a house of cards or dominoes, if you will. You've seen those videos. Then there's going to be something that's going to be there to replace it. And we don't know what that is. And you go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that what you're saying is right on the money. And no pun intended, I know we're talking about the bank closures, but it really is a bullseye, what you're saying. And that's why I've been so optimistic. One of the things I've been celebrating and been happy about over the last few years is that we will have a chance to just totally focus all of our energy. We do have that chance right now to focus all of our energy on creating the new and to allow the crumble to allow the old world to just fall however it will in its own time and in its own way. We don't really, as you were saying, we don't really need to be going around smashing it down. I really love creating the new. And if you'd like to just be inwardly prepared for the bank crisis that I'm not so sure it can be avoided. I'm just not entirely sure there's any way around it. If you'd like to be prepared for that, I welcome your sending me an email asking me to send you the free ebook. It will also give you some spiritual exercises that are sort of like what I offer my clients, that will give you a taste of what it's like to use the kinds of fertilizers that I like to work with. But the main thing is that it will to sort of get you started on kindling the sovereignty within you, on kindling the clarity and the willingness to be your own best friend, no matter what's going on in the world. So just send me an email and request the ebook, and I'll get it to you right away. The email address for me is Elliott Robertson. That's Elliott, 2 L's and 2 T's, Robertson. Joyful World, no punctuation, one word, at gmail.com.
So Elliott, Joyful World at gmail.com.
Elliott Robertson, Joyful
Elliott,
World.
I beg your pardon. Elliott Robertson. I'm going to mess it up. Elliott Robertson. We will also link to that email address. We'll put that in the video where that folks can see, but we'll also put that link in our podcast as well, so people can click on that and it'll open up their email generator, what have you, and they can do that, and just ask for that ebook that you're talking about. Is there a title for that?
Preparing for the bank closures, for the coming bank closures.
Preparing for the coming bank closures, and we don't know how severe it's going to be. It could be mild, it could be severe, but needless to say, it reminded me, and we shared this in our conversation, it reminded me of the Vedic astrology that I used to talk with my friend David Hawthorne about. He's a Vedic astrologer, and how what he does is he lays out this map, this roadmap, and along the way, he tells you, okay, there's going to be rain here, there'll be snow here, a little wind over here, sunshine over here, and so on and so on and so on. And he lays out, for example, the conditions that as you travel along this road, you're going to run into. And you can choose to prepare for those conditions before you get there, so that they are not nearly as say devastating or chaotic or interfering with your forward motion, shall we say. and then you eventually pass through that particular area and you move on to the next one and so forth. And that's really all you're saying, is that, yes, this is what you're seeing, as I said before, and a lot of economists are also speculating as well, and so forth. So what's wrong with being prepared? And there are ways to do that, and staying optimistic and staying with that glass half full. I'm not sure what it's full of. Money, I suppose. Fill that glass half full with money. But that seems to me the message that you're sending is that we need to do those little things. It doesn't sound like these are horrendous things that we need to do just to prepare. We talk about this here in California all the time. Are you prepared, whether it's for the big one that I've been hearing about since the 70s, maybe even earlier than that, wildfire, which certainly we have had over the decades that I've been here for 17 years. And with the rains we just had, the potential has just skyrocketed. So we need to prepare. And I think we'll be okay. I really do. And we'll get through this period of time. And whatever else comes your way. So I thank you for sharing those concepts and ideas and optimism with us regarding the potentials.
You're most welcome. And yes, sometimes we do need to start with baby steps to sort of get our inner sails set in the right direction. And that can lead to more and more steps in that direction beyond baby steps. Also, there is some avenue to some practical steps in addition to preparing inwardly. The ebook does have a link to my source of information, out of which my intuitions came, the one who was speaking, who I had a bill of truth moment, as opposed to a clunk moment with. So it may end up serving you on both a practical and inward level.
Give us that email address one more time.
Elliott Robertson, joyfulworld@gmail.
All right. And that's gmail.com. And we will, as I said before, we will link to that for Elliott Robertson as we talk more here on Tell Me Your Story. I'm Richard Dugan, your host. And Elliott, we're fast approaching the end of our program. And I do want to thank you again for sharing your insights and so forth from your intuition and so forth. And again, everything's in flux. Everything is in motion. Everything's moving even as we are speaking. And who knows? We don't know what's going to happen, but we can certainly. There's nothing wrong with preparing because the preparation in and of itself is sort of a distraction, shall we say? Even though we're doing it for a reason, it gives you something to do. You know what I'm saying? And we, for example, when the first time we were evacuated from because of a fire back in 2017. We had this four-door sedan Volvo, and we packed everything we could in the trunk. And then we had animals in the front seat and in the back seat. And I mean, it was wild. But we had already prepared. We'd already packed up a bunch of stuff. So it was just, okay, it's time to get out of Dodge. Well, you get everything laid out and ready to go. And hey, if nothing happens, great. If something happens of a minor nature, even better, but a major, you're set. You're ready to go. You know what to do and so forth. So I want to thank you again for joining us. And I do have 3 final questions that I do want to ask you that I ask all of my guests. And I'm glad you sought me out. I'm intrigued by all of these insights that people have, my guests included, and because it opens up avenues of curiosity, at least for me, and I'm hoping for our listeners as well. But before I ask you those 3 questions, I want to thank you for listening to and watching Tell Me Your Story. New Paradigms for a New World. We're giving you choices and knowledge of those choices to help make your dreams come true. Sundays at 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. Monday mornings at 1 a.m. and then Wednesdays at 9 a.m. That's our special edition of Tell Me Your Story. We stream at those times at richarddugan.com. And we podcast at iCloud, that's SoundCloud. SoundCloud, iTunes, TuneIn Radio, Spotify, Stitcher, Player FM, Blueberry, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, many other locations as well. And we're on YouTube where you can watch these interviews. And we hope that you will do so. Hope you'll subscribe, at least hit notifications so that every time I put a new conversation up, you will know it and you can go there and listen to our guest and hear what they have to say as well. We also ask that if you can support this project, this program financially, we would greatly appreciate that. It is only an ask, okay? This is not a question of, and we won't be here next week if you don't. No. I played that game. I saw that game being played enough in religious broadcasting in the 15 years I was there. I swore I would never, ever do that. Okay. But if you can support us, we have a PayPal account. It's there for your security as well as ours. And then also, as we've been talking about all program long about intuition, we ask you to take time during this, the decade of perfect vision, to go within and listen to that still small voice. And then sometimes just sit there quietly. Maybe there is no voice to speak. Maybe it's just you need to take a breath. Breathe, feel your breathing, feel the breeze on your face and arms and hands and what have you. Listen to the wind if there's a breeze through the trees. And get out in nature as much as you can. We hope that you can do that. With all that, I want to again thank Elliott Robertson for joining us. And the first of my three questions to you is, who is Elliott Robertson?
I am discovering that with each passing day more and more. And I hope I can help clients also discover who they are more and more as they continue to look within and do the work.
What is your life's purpose?
I'm here to lift people up. That's been my life purpose. I detected that when I was 20 years old. I discerned it when I was 20. And it's been part of my mission statement ever since.
And finally, what was your best day?
Today has been my best day. Thank you for helping me notice that.
And I thank you for being a part of Tell Me Your Story too.
Thank you so much. I enjoyed it every minute of it.
And I thank you for listening to and watching Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World, where we are giving you choices and knowledge of those choices to help make your dreams come true. And until our next broadcast, podcast, videocast, love to lol. Jeanette, I'm still listening. And Dad, be happy.